Hi, kiddos. Welcome to biology. We're just going to do our last lecture on evolution before we start taxonomy. In this lecture, we're going to focus on how new species form. The process of the forming of a new species is called speciation. So that's what we're going to be focused on, speciation. A species is defined as a biological group that will naturally interbreed and produce fertile, healthy offspring. So for instance, in this example, the eastern bluebird and the western bluebird, although having very similar looks and very similar habits, they would be considered separate species because they would not naturally interbreed. The eastern bluebird has one song that it uses to attract mates, the western bluebird another. Because they wouldn't attract mates from opposite species, they can't be considered to be the same species. So they have to naturally interbreed and produce fertile offspring to be a species. So what leads to speciation? Small changes over a very long period of time can change one group of organisms from a previous ancestral species to a new emergent species. So that's one way that evolution can occur to make a new species. Another way that evolution can make a new species is if the original heritage population kind of stays the same and doesn't change much, but a subpopulation is possibly separated or enters a new environment or starts to occupy a new niche. If that happens, then you can have a heritage or an ancestral population living at the same time as a new species. Oftentimes, new species arise from subgroups of the same species being isolated from each other. This is called allopatric speciation and is probably the most common way that new species are formed. In allopatric speciation, you can think of these two L's as like a wall in between the A and the rest of the word. But in allopatric speciation, the groups are separated by geography, so an island, a canyon, a river. In this case, you can see allopatric speciation. Here's the original population. A river changes course and starts to run through the original population, separating this population from this one. Mutations accumulate in one of the populations, and so that when the river returns back to its normal flow, the new populations are no longer going to interbreed. Another way that organisms can create new species is through sympatric speciation. This is less common, but this is when individuals that are inhabiting the same area and were once of the same species just start to occupy slightly different niches within that area. So here's apples, and these are hawthorn apples, and here are apple maggot flies, okay? It just so happens that in the same orchard, a hawthorn fly will lay its eggs on a hawthorn apple, and a normal apple maggot fly will lay its eggs on a normal apple. And so because of that, they have over time become separate species just because of their behavior. That's called sympatric speciation. They can no longer mate. This is a phylogenetic tree, and it shows how species are related. You can see here that we have bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. Animals would include humans, right? So this is where we would be here with animals. And you can see that we have a common ancestor more recently with archaea. So we're more recently related to archaea. Even though these are bacteria and these are bacteria, we're more closely related to these bacteria. This is another type of phylogenetic tree, and you can see that this is showing the common ancestry of the Ecuadorian finch, and then it's split off into different subgroups based on the different islands that they were on and the different food types that particular finch was eating. Oftentimes, phylogenetic trees, the lines show time. So this long line means that this lamprey shared common ancestry with this bird a long, long time ago. Whereas these short lines show that more recently crocodiles and birds shared common ancestry. A cladogram is similar to a phylogenetic tree. except for the a cladogram is generally focusing on grouping organisms based on traits. So they'll oftentimes include a series of traits that they're using to group organisms together. So this group of organisms would be a clade, and that's why it's called a cladogram. Convergent evolution is when organisms not closely related can evolve similar traits as a result of having to adapt to similar environments. So remember we talked about how homologous structures are indicators that organisms that may look very different have a common ancestry. In this case, it's like the opposite. You can see that a long time ago, vertebrata or vertebrates diverged from the chondrichthyes or the sharks. Okay, so there was a divergence here, and all vertebrates are going to be part of this, and dolphins, for instance, are going to be part of Mammalia. Now, if you remember, dolphins are a type of small whale, Delphinidae, and they used to walk on land, right? When they started going back into the water and became hunters in the water, they developed characteristics that helped them to be good hunters in the water. Guess what? Millions and millions of years before that, the sharks had already developed those same characteristics. So the smooth skin, the dark surface on top and the light surface on the bottom, this fin that acts as a rudder, these two fins to help them steer, and propulsion in the back. Okay, so although they may have some similar characteristics, they are not closely related. Those characteristics evolved after they had diverged from each other. And that can be a little bit confusing when you're trying to use a cladogram to group organisms into set families or clades. So what happens when a population cannot adapt to a changing environment? What happens if one ancestral species has various forms, but none of them are fit for the environment? They're going to go extinct. Species that go extinct are no longer living on this planet. That's the definition of extinction. However, there are a lot of species on our planet that are extant, meaning species that are currently living on our planet. And just because we think that organisms are going extinct, they may have ancestors that diverged long ago that are still on our planet, still carrying their genes on. All right, that wraps us up for this last little section. I hope you finish those paper notes. Make sure you put your name on it, your period, and give it and submit it into the basket, okay? You guys have an awesome day. Thanks.